right. So, I haven't recorded much lately. Um, so, let me see what wants to be shared here. We just keep healing on the path. You just keep moving forward. You just keep healing. And trying to feel into what's true for me right now. I got a job. I don't know how much I want to talk about that yet, but it's been interesting and frustrating and many things, many feelings, many emotions, many challenges. This project. I've learned a lot. I recorded a video yesterday just trying to get back into the flow of things, talking in general about, just whatever was coming up. And yeah, just without getting too specific or into too much detail, I've applied to so many different places and gotten little glimpses into so many possibilities. It's like dating in a sense, with all the attendant anxieties of trying to figure out, is this a good person to go on a date with, to commit to. Job, in a sense, is kind of at least in some sense, a bigger commitment because you can't really just go on one date. Although that has been interesting, a lot of places that I've applied to, some of the places are doing this thing. They tend to be kind of smaller businesses where they have you come in and just work a shift and they pay you, but just for you to get a sense of the work and for them, I guess, to get a sense. That is such a brilliant way and just a way to do things and eliminate so much anxiety because it's not as big of a pressure as committing, fully to a job. It's the equivalent of going on a date or something like that, going out to coffee. I think it's a really smart way of doing things. But yeah, from big box chain stores that I've applied to, Home Depot, Lowe's, Smith's, grocery store, Albertsons, Market Street. What is it? Advantage Auto Parts. Can't remember the name. Some of these bigger businesses to just, small mom and pop, 1 location, 2 location stores. I've also been putting out flyers and trying to do, groundskeeping type of work, yard work for people, that kind of thing. So I've been doing some of that. But man, for somebody who struggles with indecisiveness, this is the gauntlet to run, because there's so much unknowns about, a workplace and so much fraught territory. One of the things, I don't know, should I get into this? I've applied to work at a couple of different farms, and I've got rice cooking, so I may need to pause this here in a moment, but yeah. I like the idea of being outdoors, working with just getting busy, getting down to work. I've worked as a desk jockey. I've heard somebody use that phrase, desk jockey. I've worked in offices. I've worked, a lot of different positions in my life. But I really like the idea of just getting physical, hands in the dirt, tangible, labor-intensive, physical labor type of stuff. There's something satisfying about that kind of work. And I live in a kind of a little bit of a rural place. There's a lot of there's some farms around. And trying to figure my way how I want to talk about this. It's a bigger conversation, There's all these intersecting dimensions of one's life and experience and being that go into something like applying to a place, deciding if you want to work somewhere. The job, the workplace environment, the culture, what type of work it is full-time, part-time, is there a chance for advancement? What's the management like? What's the culture like, the ethic? There's ethical dimensions. And one thing that I've talked about, kind of riffing off this other video I erased, but one thing I've talked about a little bit is my sort of spiritual and political evolution these past years. And, that I've kind of moved out of a more rigid, ideologically fixated place, you know, especially in years back. Got a video I think called Dangers of Ideology where I talk more about this, but having been, sort of looking back from where I'm at now, it doesn't feel like I was, it just feels sort of superficial where I was at back then, but I guess there was a sincerity there, and but being, very much leftist, identitarian, kind of radical, progressive politics, being kind of that's where I was at politically. Again, I don't think it was really well thought out. I won't get into all the reasons behind it. I did that in that video, so if that's interesting, you can check out that video. But as I've healed, as I've sort of just moved on, it's kind of a natural progression that is a attested to, well-documented phenomenon of moving from kind of left towards a more conservative position as you get older. That's not a new phenomena. So part of it is just, I think, probably getting older, but I think a lot of it, and this is going to sound judgmental, the reason I think I was so susceptible to that ideology was just, well, that's actually kind of a complicated thing. Part of it is my own woundedness and my own confusion around who I am, what's real. Really that simple. What's real? I know how that sounds really vague, but it's also pretty much says it all in a sense. That there's a sort of spiritual void in modern culture. In the wake of the disassemblage of so many of our sort of cultural norms and the deracination of our society from its cultural roots, from its spiritual traditions, from its religious traditions, from family systems, norms, and gender norms, and all that stuff. It opens up this kind of chaotic vacuum. And without those kind of stabilizing features in a society where a lot of us are really kind of adrift. Yeah, again, it's more complicated than this, but that was a piece of it, is not knowing what's real. And when you're lost in that way, you're susceptible to ideology. And so when you start to get more found, when you start to get more healed, the appeal, the allure of the ideology, because ideology sort of shores up, it simplifies reality, right? In a certain way, not in a healthy way, but it gives you a set of lenses to look at reality. In this case, the kind of identitarian, oppressor-oppressed binary, and it gives you a sense of identity, let's just say that. And the soul needs a resting place. Ultimately, that resting place is in its own depths, in God, connectedness to spirit, to God. But shorn of that, disconnected from that, separated from that connection, surrogates, and there's a great need for a landing place, and so you start shopping around for surrogates and substitutes for God, and ideology can temporarily appear to fill that void. It doesn't really, but anyways, so long story long, as you get healed, come back more into a capacious sense of self, a spacious sense of connectedness, a healthier, more balanced, integrated self. The ideology sort of starts to fall away. You start to open up, which is to say, I become more independent. In general, but politically also independent. I could even say independent, leaning right in some ways. But that binary too, the left and right, starts to break down a little bit. It becomes more about what's true, and being open. I guess that's the big gift of being more healed, is being less, because there's a kind of insecurity and tightness and paranoia about everything that is outside of the ideology. And so you start to censor the world, yourself, and there's a strong us-them dichotomy, and there's certain things that are just anathema to your ideological stance, so you won't. There's my rice. Be right back. So in the clutches, in the capture of an ideology, when you're held captive to an ideology, you build all these partitions in your mind and in your spirit and emotionally, etc. Not so different from being in a cult, right? Get more and more puritanical, more and more rigid. There's like a purity spiral that you get into, and you just won't entertain the enemy. But as you heal, as the ideology just no longer serves you, no longer has a role to play, there's an opening up and a freedom. That's been great, just being more open to listening to different perspectives, different people, and just having a more integrated, multifaceted way of looking at reality, not being so fixated in any one spot. And it becomes less about allegiance to a group and more about allegiance to the truth. And that's a moving target in some sense. You got to be humble. It's not like you're ever in full possession of the truth, not even close, but you're more open to the pursuit of truth. And so my views have become more and more what's the word? Heterodox? Just in the sense of if you were to map them against kind of the political left-right spectrum. Anyways, that doesn't really matter. But the point is that one of the this is all going to tie back hopefully into talking about applying to work on a farm, and how, just something seemingly kind of straightforward like that is this kind of, there's many tributaries and different things to consider. But one of the things about that really strong leftist ideology is a hatred for America. It's maybe more complicated, nuanced than that, but tends to play out that way. It's kind of a grievance-centered politics. It's a cynical politics. It's like there's a strong identity, there's a strong investment in this, in being the kind of eternal critic, always pointing out, all the sins of the nation, all the oppressive tendencies. And it's a certain lens through which you read reality that becomes a very dark lens. I never would have thought of myself as patriotic back then, probably. It would have been, or having pride in my country, that would have been kind of a no-no, ideologically speaking, or but I am proud to be an American. It's hard to say that without hearing that song. I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. Now, it's not a fool's pride. It's not an idiot pride. But it's been a great discovery and recovery for me, and it feels just so much more wholesome to have love for my country. And that just, not to reflexively just think, oh, I'm living in the evil empire, I'm living in Babylon, I'm living in the waning days of Rome. And again, you don't swing. It's like there's nuance here, right? There's room for bigger discussion, because you don't want to just be reflexively, ideologically jaded toward everything about your country, everything about reality. You don't want to be reflexively nationalistic, is kind of foolish. I'll just say idiot patriotism. When you get really far to the other end, really far right. But there's, I guess, a synthesis or an integration, or just a more holistic, grounded way of looking at things. Yeah, we've done a lot of fucked up stuff in our history. I mean, let's talk about slave trade. All the chaos and mess of interaction with Native American groups, broken treaties, etc. Yeah, I mean, I could, because of all that sort of really leftist education, I could really kind of probably read off quite a litany of horrors in the country's history. And there's no but in there. It's like, yeah, there's just some real fucked up shit. Slavery, absolutely horrific, chattel slavery. man's inhumanity to man. So you don't just sweep everything under the rug, not at all. You acknowledge all that stuff. And yet, so I guess there's a little bit of a but, and yet abolition is also part of our history. That hundreds of thousands fought and died. I mean, I guess the Civil War was not just about slavery, but it was definitely a big part of it. And, are we just going to throw all of that history out? It's like, yeah, life is fucked up on this planet. You also have to have kind of a bigger context. We get so myopic about how evil the U.S. is, but slavery as an institution stretches back basically to the dawn of civilization. Cross-culturally, it's not like a white person's thing, no. You find it appearing in Arab societies, sub-Saharan Africa, basically anywhere that there's been tribal warfare, there's been conquest, capture, enslavement, and that slavery itself is not a one-size-fits-all. There's a bunch of different configurations and forms of slavery, so it's a bigger conversation. But it certainly was not, the U.S. did not have a patent on slavery. Was it particularly brutal, awful, atrocious, horrific in the U.S.? Yeah. I mean, I haven't done a whole lot of study on cross-culturally on slavery, but I've heard it said that, our variety of slavery in the U.S., chattel slavery, was particularly horrific, and I don't doubt that. But the U.S. and the Western world was also sort of at the vanguard of the abolition of slavery. That has to be a huge part of the equation. It's something to be proud of. And that obviously was black African slaves, who benefited from that and took part in that movement. There's all kinds of prominent figures from antebellum and bellum and postbellum America. Black historical figures that were abolitionists, powerful voices, and a lot of European Americans that took part in that helped formulate and organize and laid their life down, put their life on the line, and in many cases laid their life down in the cause of the union, of saving this country from schism, and also of helping to end slavery. So that's a part of America too, and that's something to be really proud of. That's huge evolution in human consciousness and transformation. But even, there's just so many. When you're in an ideological rut, there's so much information and data you exclude. Our Bill of Rights, pretty spectacular. A lot of the noble, high-minded ideals, I guess you'd say Enlightenment ideals, of our founders, Jefferson, Hamilton, Thomas Paine. Lincoln is just a remarkable historical figure, complex but remarkable. MLK, When has the world seen a more Christ-like figure? I mean, maybe that's stating a little too strongly, but yeah, I mean, a very Gandhian, Christ-like person within recent memory, Martin Luther King Jr. I guess he was a philanderer, adulterer. I don't know how much of that is FBI slander, but I mean, doesn't detract from. Yeah, I mean, he's human too. I wouldn't be surprised to find out, that he was not a saint. And I mean, yeah, anyways, I've certainly heard a lot of that he plagiarized his doctoral thesis, parts of it, and was sleeping around, and I don't agree with that, obviously, but Bobby Kennedy, Sr., amazing historical figure. I'm getting sort of lost here. I'm trying to refocus, but there's just, yeah, I mean, and of course there's all kinds of horror shows happening. But the thing is, it's like you start to realize there's a cosmic forgiveness from a more integrated state that you grant to reality. You recognize the brokenness of this world, and so you don't expect perfection, and so you're not really that let down when you find out about whatever covert operations in Latin America, or you don't agree with it, what was it, Allende, Pinochet, Chile, Iran-Contra. Geopolitics is complicated, and we're definitely not. But another perspective that's useful is we've got this kind of amazing nation state experiment going on the planet right now for the past couple 100 years. 196 countries or whatever it is right now. And it's all these sort of political laboratories, real-time experiments being run. And it provides, good data to compare and contrast and to contextualize. And when you dig into any country, you find good and bad. Right? And cynicism just feels cheap after a while, because if you're looking for something to be aggrieved about, you're going to find it. And it's going to make you feel righteous, and it's going to give you a sense of community and a sense of identity to be against something. And we need prophets, and we need people to hold us accountable, for sure. But you do it from a place of love. It's like, and this is not my analogy, but with basketball or football. In fact, I heard somebody say this recently, I can't remember who. There are certain boundaries within a game. What defines the game is the boundaries, is the set of rules, is the interaction, of those boundaries, the rules, and how the game plays out. Without the rules, you no longer have the game. Like with basketball, you could just pick up the ball, no dribble, run it straight down to the other end of the court, and get there a lot. You could just Heisman your way down the court, and that would be, in a sense, probably faster, more efficient. But the moment that you do that, you're no longer playing basketball. You got to dribble. You can't travel with the ball. And the rules, the parameters are what make it interesting. Wouldn't be interesting if it was just, or in football, if you ran off the field on the sidelines, you could avoid the other team and get to the end zone. But you wouldn't be playing football. It just wouldn't be interesting. And there's something similar that you start to feel, that there's an integrity in playing the game impeccably, and that there's something beautiful about the experimental, contingent quality of life that we have. They talk about the democratic experiment, and you can get into this kind of John Lennon, one world, no boundary, that whole Imagine vibe. And there's something to be said about that. There's something beautiful about it. He's pointing out something, but I don't know, more and more I just feel like play the game with integrity. This is the world as it is. We have these nation states. You can argue that's not the best way to run a society, that there's other configurations, and you can start to get kind of utopian in that sense, and that's all interesting. That's a whole nother interesting aspect of American society, is all the different utopian projects and utopian communities and ideals that we've had. But with art, it's like if you have just infinite choice, the art, you get kind of paralyzed, and the art kind of loses some of its meaning. But when there's certain parameters, if you're painting, if you have just a certain set of colors, not too few, that's also not conducive to creativity, but just there's a balance there of just enough choice, artistic choice, and materials and possibility for innovation, for creativity to flow and to find expression. But again, not an infinite amount. There has to be some kind of parameters on your palette, on your, whatever, 15 different colors, 10 different colors. That actually can be really helpful to the process of creativity. Without some rules, without some order, just pure chaos, pure anarchy, the soul becomes really disintegrated. And you can see that on the micro level too, in your own life, your own personal experience, that it's good to have boundaries and to have preferences, and you don't hold them too tight or too rigidly. But if you don't have boundaries, if you don't have values, things that you're willing to defend, that matter to you, you get really dissipated and compromised. And that scales up. It's like we've got all these nested spheres of influence, from kind of the personal, familial, communal, civic, at the state level, national level, international. And it's like you want to play that game and respect that game and play it with a certain amount of integrity and impeccability. And so it's in that context, long way of getting back to this, but that I've come more and more to value the U.S. And if I was born in Spain, I think I'd feel the same, that I'd want to come to a more integrated place where I loved my own culture and, was critical of it where it caused harm, but had just kind of a foundational love for it Not that it's one's total identity, no. God, supreme, absolute, transcendent grace. That ultimately is the sun from which all life flows. However, there's so many layers of creation, and you want to be integrated at all those layers, and part of that is belonging to a nation. Like I used to really feel kind of reflexively anti-military for a time period. I don't think I grew up initially feeling that way. But I see that there is a real nobility in choosing to enlist, in being a soldier. Just that commitment, not any particular war. Most of the wars we fought, I would say, are probably not just wars. The vast majority, but just the willingness to say, I'm willing to die for my country, protect my country. Yeah, that's a powerful thing. It's also true a lot of people sign up for the army because they're poor and don't have another way out of poverty and shitty circumstances. So I think people enlist with, not always with noble intentions, or at best sometimes mixed intentions, but yeah, some people do. And I think it can also have the effect of ennobling somebody to have that kind of discipline and to be a part of a larger commitment to your, I don't know what the right word would be, to your unit, to your troop, to your brigade. I don't know what the right unit, the right word would be. But yeah, to have that larger commitment to your fellow soldiers and to the country. Again, ultimately, your allegiance is to God. And where there's a conflict between God's truth and the nation's truth, you got to go with God's truth. But yeah, it's important to have people who are willing to fight and die for the country. It's just as important, let me say also, to have a political class, politicians, legislators, people in positions of making the laws and forcing the laws, ruling on the laws, that they have integrity and that they don't put those sons and daughters of our country in harm's way. And blessed are the peacemakers. I think that's true as well. It's like, again, you don't want to get stuck in any one corner. You want to acknowledge everything that's true here. And I think that gets lost in the God bless America, support your troops rhetoric. It's like, yes, absolutely. But also support our peacemakers. War is not a good thing. It's a failure. It's a catastrophic failure when we're at war. In this world, it seems to be necessary for our current state of evolution, but sometimes, or you could say, you don't want to say necessary, inevitable. It is what is. But blessed are the peacemakers as well, and so you don't leave that out of the equation. But yeah, all this whole context, thinking about all this, reorients how I think about things like immigration, for example. And I used to, in a former life, it now seems, when I was a bit younger, I used to work with immigrants. And again, it is one of those flashpoint radioactive conversations where it's hard not to polarize and it's hard to hear a nuanced conversation. But because, yeah, when you say immigrant, there's different statuses, there's different levels of what that can mean. Somebody can be here having broken the law, meaning they're here illegally in the country. That's an immigrant. Somebody could be here on a work visa or have work permission or work sponsorship. They're not a citizen, but they've got that permission, I believe. That's an immigrant. Somebody could be here having gotten and been granted asylum, an asylee. Somebody could be here having applied for or in the process of getting their citizenship. I don't know all the steps and all the different categories. And then somebody could be here just fully legally, having gone through the whole process and emigrated from their country, right? Immigrated to our country and be here as a citizen. Would that be a naturalized citizen? I don't know. I don't know the terminology, but I speak Spanish, and I used to really lean into that. So I worked with a lot of people that probably were here legally, at least some, probably most, many of them. And I wouldn't do that today. And again, it's in this context of well, first of all, I've lived a lot of different places. I've lived in different countries and worked in different countries, studied in different countries, and always did so following the rules. I could say out of respect for those countries, but it'd probably be more, it would be more accurate to say I just didn't want to, I mean, how would I have, it just was simpler, I guess, and I just wouldn't have wanted to deal with the legal trouble of having done anything other than go by the books, by the letter of the law. Yeah, and I don't know, I guess, I mean, give me some grace here because I'm just trying to flesh all this out, and it's nuanced, it's complicated, but because a big when you get into this immigration debate, there's so many valid points on many different sides. You know, people that are, you know, we've got right now, interestingly enough, we've got all these ICE crackdowns, ICE going into different businesses. I just saw this video of what is it, Immigration Customs Enforcement, ICE, going into what was it, Glen Valley Foods, I think, something like that, in Omaha, Nebraska, and arresting close to 100 people, I think. Mostly they looked like Latin American, probably Mexican or Guatemalan, El Salvador, who knows, Honduras. Um, and so we've got all these riots happening in the streets, Los Angeles. I think some starting to pop up in different places, and that's not a new thing, but it's definitely going on right now. And so for the mindset of many of the people that are out there and flying Mexican flags and rioting, they would point to things like, well, it's a really broken immigration system. That the pathways are not very clear and they're really complicated. And I don't know, I haven't studied it in depth, but if that's, maybe that's true. I'm open to the possibility that it's just a really unwieldy, inefficient system. I wouldn't be surprised, I also wouldn't be surprised if that's being overblown, but and so, yeah, there's a little bit of truth and wisdom there. It's like streamline the process, make it an easy process, make it a clear and efficient, what the expectations are, what the process is. Not that you just willy-nilly grant citizenship or a pathway to anybody. Again, I think it's a sign of a country's low self-esteem if they don't have criteria for who comes into a country. It's not a bad thing to have standards and to have criteria and to have, boundaries, and to say, there's certain qualifications that are necessary if you want to come into the country. It's not like a right that everybody in the world has. No, you as a country have to stand up, have some dignity, self-respect, and say, this is what we expect. It's great. You could come here and you could make a great contribution, and that would be, appreciated. But it's a two-way street here, and we have a say, and we have the foundational, fundamental say in who comes into the country. So I think that's also true. But there's a little bit of kind of an infantilization that I was operating under, and that I think a lot of people, I guess you'd say on the left, operate under when they talk about immigration. And it's like we're expected to follow the law. I expect myself to be accountable, and when I fuck up, to be accountable, and to be respectful of another country. If I were to be in another country or to want to, I don't feel entitled to just go into any country and, and yet we tend to say that people are entitled to come into the U.S., that it's some kind of an exception to that rule, and that we don't have to hold people accountable. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, if you're here because you crossed illegally or you didn't take the legal avenue, that was a choice that you made. It's a little bit infantilizing to not hold people accountable to those choices, and that there are consequences. And again, it's complicated because we've sort of incentivized as a country, and we haven't enforced the rules, and we've been really lax and wishy-washy and turned a blind eye. And so we're complicit in it. But as an individual, if you choose to break the law, if you choose to come into a country illegally, you choose to disrespect the country's laws, that's a choice. That's a choice that you made, right? Another piece of the conversation is, if we were to somehow just, as a thought experiment, just snap our fingers and exclude fire, let go of all the illegal labor in the country, it would fuck up the economy. And that's also true. I mean, I haven't run the numbers. I'm sure that's something you can look up, but again, I wouldn't be at all surprised to think that, or to find out that would be a significant impact, if not totally devastating, to the country's economy. It's also true that, immigrants are, by and large, I guess speaking specifically about people who are here illegally, good people. And that's lost on the right, too far to the right, People from Latin America especially, but yeah, just immigrants in general, because of the situation they're in, but also I think just culturally and other reasons, tend to be very hard workers. I have zero, that's not even a question in my mind. I've just known a lot of immigrants, known a lot of people, good people, kind people, people who love their family, people who are just wanting to live a good life and work hard and are funny and are, just people that have a certain set of good values, many of which are great values. And you tend to lose that, on the right with, talking about immigrants just in really degrading, derogatory terms, dehumanizing terms. Because it's just not accurate. Yeah, there's people who have come here illegally that are criminals, and that's sort of a double slap in the face, especially as somebody who cares about their country. And it's a good thing to care about your country. Sucks when anybody does something, to violate somebody else's rights, liberty, or harm them, sexually assault or homicide or whatever, steal from, disrespect. Yeah, it's gonna suck, but even more so if you've come into the country having flouted, is that a word? Having totally, having broken the law. Actually, it's just even more egregious. It's like, got even less tolerance for that, but that's not the majority of immigrants. That's in any population. You're gonna find just criminal, confused, bad people. But fundamentally, if you're here illegally, you made a choice. The buck has to stop somewhere, right? You go back and forth and back and forth. And I think it's not at all, it's not a sign of bigotry or racism to have a sense of self-respect and respect for your country and respect for the integrity of your country. And part of that is having boundaries and, in a very kind of literal sense, borders. That is part of what defines a nation. And again, you can argue that the nation state is the issue, but that's the reality. That's what we're working under. And and that ain't gonna change. That's just how it is. Let me start a new video, break this up.